So, Tim, one of the churches that we're working with together is one that has engaged us to help them improve the culture of generosity, to look carefully at the organizational health. And at the same time, the senior leader is looking to transition. And so we have brought you into that engagement to help guide the transition of the leadership. Tell me what it is about that work that draws you to it.
Yeah, I tell you what, there's probably nothing I do that's more fulfilling than sitting with a pastor. Often it's a founding or a longtime pastor. They've been there 30, 40 years. I've worked with two pastors recently where they're in their mid 70s. They started the church in their 20s. And it's like near and dear to their heart. They birthed this baby. They know they can't do it forever. And they're navigating this season of transition of handing it off. And
Mhm.
so whether often the church will initiate that, the board or the session will initiate the conversation of like, we need to have we need to start talking about succession. Sometimes it's way in advance. It's the pastor's 55 and they want a 10-year plan or a 15-year plan. Um, Sometimes it's more like 3 or 4 years out, but let's work together. And so I love to go in and navigate that with the church, with that pastor, with the board, with some of the senior staff that will be impacted by this transition. Um, Sometimes it's helping them determine if an internal candidate is the right fit for that. Like, what are the pros and cons with some objective outside input on do we have the right person in house, and if not, how do we go about it? Finding that person externally. When's the right time to do that? When is the right time to communicate that to the church, to our staff in church? Because once that word gets out, the clock starts to tick. Like the time,
Yeah.
yes, time starts to click down, and so you really have to time that really well. And with the pastor themselves, what makes it just uh, I think very sacred conversation is there's an identity piece to that that's
Mhm.
deep. Like it's
Mhm.
like in some cases that's all they like they're married, they love their wife and their spouse and their kids, but they're married to their ministry and they don't
Right.
know what, and they still have gas in the engine. Either they've become aware, others have made them aware that their energy is waning, or that the church would be better served by someone who's got more, younger or more innovative or whatever. And that's terrifying for that senior leader. So some of what I've done is help that senior pastor, like years in advance, start to figure out what's the identity past this church. Because if you
Mhm.
can solve the identity question for them, and if you can solve the financial issue, in other words, they actually can step away and survive and thrive as a family, as a couple. If you can solve those two things, then that gives them objectivity to figure out what's the right time to transition and hand this to the next leader. And those are just great conversations. Uh, and so sometimes that's a 2-day engagement where we're coming in, we're just helping them with a succession plan because um, it's not coming immediately,
Mhm.
or they don't have a timeline for it. Other times it's, and one engagement I'm doing through Horizons right now is working with a church over probably a 2 or 3 or 4 year period where they know the timeline and they know the senior pastor will be stepping down in about 4 years. And so how do we get there effectively and how do we not mess this up? And so just working with a succession team there as a transition consultant, basically to help them make the right decisions that they need to make to get between here and there 4 years from now.
So, Tim, I'm not an expert in this area, but I have seen a lot of transitions. I've seen a lot that have gone well. I've seen those that haven't. And there's a corollary that I have noticed that those that do it intentionally, meaning plan it over time as opposed to just a hard cutover, tend to do better, especially where you're drawing somebody in from the outside. You have a great deal more experience with this. You worked in the placement world, the leadership placement world for a number of years. What's your perspective on it?
I think it varies a bit. It's tough to give like a one answer for that question, but so some of it depends on the church's trajectory. So if this church
Mhm.
is in decline and has been for a whole lot of years, or if this church is on kind of a growth track and
Yeah.
has been for a few years, that makes a big difference. So I think we know like most churches in the country are in that more in that decline standpoint. So, and it depends on what they want. Sometimes a church just wants, like, we just want to pastor and shepherd and love our people well. We want to bring someone else in that can pastor and shepherd and love them well. They're not looking to double or triple or add campuses or add rooms. And so that's kind of one answer. But other churches are like, yeah, we actually care about this. We want to turn around our decline. We want to be up and to the right and growing. Usually that means an external candidate, someone who is coming from the outside with some fresh thinking, some fresh ideas. I don't think the more the kind of the transactional where you hire someone, a search firm or whatever to help you find the pastor. I don't think that has to be a clean cut. Like it's where it's like they bring them in and they start. I think that can be a handoff as well,
Mhm.
and done well. It's a little bit risky. It's risky because it's risky for that candidate. It's risky for that person who's moving their family from across the country, across the state, to go to this strange town they've never lived in, um, with a slow transition where they're thinking, you know what, these guys might change their mind. That's risky. And so, but I
Mhm.
think that can be mitigated with the right kind of contract and right kind of um, uh, prenuptials. That's a horrible word to use for this, but kind of agreement in advance of like what happens if this goes badly. Some of that can be mitigated, but I think there can be a healthy transition. I love to see a healthy handoff where probably on the low end, there's like 6 months, like thinking this is like an external candidate coming from the outside. On the low end, probably 6 months or so, where he or she's working hand in hand with the senior minister who is transitioning. Um, Sometimes the senior minister who's transitioning, they just don't have the wiring to develop and pour into the next. They're just not wired that way, and they just don't know how to do that. But in that case, they're probably not like trying to develop them, but they're just handing off institutional knowledge.
Mhm.
They're getting them in the same room with the stakeholders that they need to know, with the executive leaders, the financial contributors, those that are like these are the key relationships you really need to engage in for this to be effective and successful. And they're making those handoffs. They're taking some shots for that new leader, um, so that they can say, when the new leader has a fresh idea or a new idea or whatever, the senior leader who's still there but transitioning can say, you know what, I'm behind this person and you can trust them because I trust them. And so I've seen that happen effectively both with internal candidates with a slow transition and handoff, and with external candidates where you have like a very intentional handoff.
So, Tim, what I'm hearing is there's not a one size fits all. The thread that runs through that is intentionality and doing what really fits the situation of the church. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely not a one size fits all. I think another really key thing is if that transitioning pastor wants to or is planning to stay at the church or stay in the area. I actually think there's nothing wrong with that, but it's going to require like some intentionality again and some agreements up front, just to make sure, because he or she has the ability, without intention and without motive, to torpedo the whole thing.